It's that time of the year again, and what better place to be than one where unnerving stories await. As always, pull up a chair and make yourself at home. They're waiting. When I moved into that old farmhouse with my then significant other, I already knew it wasn't going to be easy. The house had been in disarray for years, a hoarder's haven left behind after his wife left him. But that didn't change the fact that every room was piled high with garbage, clothes, boxes, you name it, stacked up to your knees. It was overwhelming, but I'm someone who can't stand clutter. I just couldn't live like that. So I dove in, determined to make it livable again. It took weeks, oil on every inch of wood, filling his truck with more than 10 loads of trash. But eventually, I carved out a clean space. I thought the hard part was over, but little did I know it was only beginning. The very first night in that house, things felt off. At that point, I had already managed to clear out part of the living room, enough for me to sleep on the couch. My boyfriend, on the other hand, was more comfortable in his RV, where he'd been sleeping for years to avoid the wreckage inside the home. His snoring was a little unbearable anyway, so I didn't mind the temporary nighttime separation. That night, I had a fight with my mom and was lying awake on the couch. I was fuming. It was around 4 a.m., I remember, and I was restless, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm my racing thoughts. At least up until I heard the back door creaking open. I wasn't alarmed at first, it was just my boyfriend, I thought, coming in from the RV. He had a habit of muttering to himself, and I could hear him shuffling around in the kitchen, opening and closing drawers, searching for something. After a few minutes of this, I decided to get up and see if I could help. The kitchen was just a few feet away, but when I walked in, the room was empty. The drawers and cabinets were all closed. I called out for him, but there was no answer. Confused, I stepped outside and began to approach the RV. I could hear him snoring loudly before I even reached the door. I stopped walking since I pretty much got my answer. I stood there for a moment processing things. Maybe he was sleepwalking, although it didn't seem likely. But when I turned around to walk the short distance back to the house, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. It had snowed lightly during the night, and the only tracks leading toward the RV were my own. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was tired, or maybe I just thought I heard something. But over the next few days, things just got weirder. When I moved my 2 cats into the house, they were immediately on edge. They growled at shadows, refused to settle, and would hiss at the air as if something unseen was prowling nearby. At night, they would act out in ways that were completely unlike them, darting around the house, fur on end and puffed up tails. I chalked it up to the stress of a new environment, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. Then came the night that clarified that for me. I had finally cleaned the bedroom to the point it was habitable, and we decided to sleep in there for the first time. The bed was positioned against a window that overlooked the cornfield, and my boyfriend insisted on sleeping on the outside, leaving me pressed against the glass. The moment I lay down, an overwhelming feeling of dread washed over me. I can't explain it. It was like something was out there just beyond the window, watching. I felt paralyzed, my heart racing as I whispered to him that something was wrong. I begged him to switch places with me, but he brushed me off, said I was just being dramatic. I've always been calm, logical, but that night nothing could shake the feeling that something was there, just beyond the glass. I eventually moved back to the couch, where I could at least escape that awful feeling of being watched. The next morning I went back into the bedroom, and that's when it was revealed. The reason I had been so uneasy. There was now a handprint on the top of the window, directly above where I had been lying. I had just cleaned that window the day before, and there was no way I would have missed something that stood out like that. I got a closer look to estimate and kind of compare, and this handprint looked massive. Looked to be about 3 times the size of my own. It sort of looked like the fingers had slightly dragged down the glass. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it could have been from something else, although what? I'm not sure. But the window was over 9 feet off the ground, directly above an old coal cellar. There was no easy way anyone could have reached that area. When I showed my boyfriend, he was surprisingly quiet. That's when he told me that his ex-wife had thought something was wrong with the house too. One day she had been making dinner, talking to him as he came home from work. They had a short but pretty full conversation, only for her to look out the window and see him just then pulling up in his truck. Whoever she had been talking to in that house wasn't him. The worst incident happened a few months later. It was nearly spring and I woke up around 4:15 in the morning. The sun was already beginning to rise, casting light through the windows. When I climbed back into bed, I slid my hand under the pillow, letting it rest over the edge of the mattress. As soon as my eyes closed, an icy cold grip wrapped around my wrist, yanking it down hard. I screamed, bolting upright, shaking my boyfriend awake. He looked at me in confusion, groggy and half asleep. I'll never forget that experience. It wasn't like anything I'd ever felt. Freezing cold and unnaturally strong. I mean, I had to struggle to get my hand free. The next day I called a friend who knew about the area. She asked me if I was aware about the cemetery that was just beyond the view of the window. Due to the fields and foliage, I had forgotten. I never really believed in things like that, but when she came over and we smudged the house with sage, laughing at ourselves to ease the tension, the activity stopped, at least for a while. My boyfriend and I's relationship didn't last, but we've remained friendly with each other. I'll never forget that house. In fact, he still lives there, and he swears nothing strange has happened since I left. But me? I know that wasn't the case when I was there, and I kind of wonder if he's telling me the truth. I was trembling as I wrote this, dredging up memories of stories that terrified me as a kid. The people who told me these things swore that they were true, and I think by now I believe that. I never personally saw anything too extreme, but there was a family in the neighborhood, an old family. They lived on the land for generations, uncles, grandparents, and children all in the same place. It was said that both the son and his mother had a gift. They could see things. They would casually mention being exhausted from waking up in the night to strange noises, seeing long-past relatives, or witnessing ghosts wandering around freely. My mother never saw anything herself, but she'd hear strange sounds around our property. We lived in a modest house out in farm country, built sometime between the 1940s and 1960s. Over the 6 years we lived there, the family shared several disturbing experiences. The son's mother often spoke of the strange things she saw. As a teenager, and on many nights after, she would wake up to the sound of old classical music coming from the living room. She'd walk in, and there, floating mid-air, was a crowd of distorted people, dancing. She later found out, long before their home was built, the land had been the site of a large dance hall. The height of the ghosts matched the floor of that long-gone building. She also frequently saw her deceased father-in-law whenever she visited her mother-in-law's house. The man had been strict and unyielding in life, and she never understood how her mother-in-law could bear living in that house alone. Guests couldn't stay more than a few minutes. They said it felt suffocating, as if the house itself didn't want them there. My own mother, tasked once with letting the dog out while the mother-in-law ran errands, refused to ever go back after that. She told me that the moment she stepped inside, she felt eyes on her. The hallway leading to the second floor filled her with such dread that she nearly ran out. She still struggles to even talk about that day. Interestingly, The son's mother would come to our house often, just for coffee or to chat with my mom, but she always hated leaving. She mentioned more than once that when she walked away from our home, she was overwhelmed with a feeling of terror. She was too frightened to look back, but could never explain why. Now, as far as the son experiences go, they are what stayed with me the most and what unsettled me about living there. His first encounter happened when he was a teenager. He was staying in his grandma's attic with a friend at the very same house my mother dreaded. In the middle of the night, needing the bathroom, he crept downstairs. The bathroom was on the first floor, down the same hallway my mother had glanced at that one time. Mounted on the wall was a moose head, and standing right beneath it was his dead uncle. The apparition was silent and unmoving, but looking directly at him. He froze, terrified, and after what felt like an eternity, he screamed, and in an instant the figure was gone. He never slept in that house again. The second story still makes me shiver, and it's the reason I hated living there until the day we moved. Our house's second floor was being renovated, and there was a large hole in the wall where some power outlets had been removed. It offered a clear view into my room from the top of the stairs. One evening I was home alone, completely engrossed in playing the Elder Scrolls Oblivion on my old HP PC, and as most gamers, I had my headset on. The son came over and called my name from downstairs, but I didn't hear him. He called again as he reached the stairs, but then stopped dead in his tracks. He swears that as he started climbing, he saw my face peeking out from the hole in the wall, smiling at him. Angry at what he thought was a prank, he ran up, only to find me at the far end of my room, still playing the game, oblivious to his calls. I'll never forget the look on his face when he realized it couldn't have been me. His anger drained away, as well as his color, replaced by sheer terror. He never set foot in our house again after that. Strange things happened constantly. I would leave my baseball bat outside while taking a break, only to come back and find it at the bottom of the stairs, facing upward, like it had been placed there deliberately. Shoes would go missing, only to reappear in bizarre places. My mother, who worked from home tending to the horses and doing small carpentry jobs, would often hear hammering, as if someone was working alongside her, but every time she searched, there was no one there. She also heard the faint cries of a baby coming from the smaller barn near the house, where she kept her horse. The horse hated going in there and often refused, becoming agitated and stubborn for no apparent reason. Eventually, we turned that barn into a garage and moved the horse to a larger barn. But even then, it preferred to stay outside. A friend of mine who would often sleep over once woke in the middle of the night and looked out the window toward the large barn. He saw lights and movement inside, even though it was supposed to be empty. That was during the time my mother was working on restoring the building, and the sight left us both uneasy. There was just something about that house. Every photo we took, if a window was visible, there would be something, a face, a shape, always in the background, watching. We moved often, but nothing ever compared to the time that we spent on that farm. I have to say that I have witnessed many strange things, but one of the most unnerving experiences happened when I was living in rural Missouri. In 2012, I moved in with my boyfriend, now husband, and his family who lived in a beautiful farmhouse on a large piece of land. The nearest neighbor was about a half a mile away, making the area very peaceful. My husband and I stayed in the basement, which was set up a lot like a 2-bedroom apartment. Almost directly after moving in, I started hearing odd sounds and seeing strange things. I didn't tell my boyfriend at first, fearing he'd think I was losing my mind. There were too many incidents to list them all, but a few still send shivers right down me when I think about them. Outside our bedroom door was a long hallway leading to the staircase in another room. My husband and I were the only ones who ever went into the basement. One night, while we were in bed watching TV, we heard heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. The sound was so loud it seemed like someone wearing heavy boots was pacing back and forth. We turned off the TV to listen more closely as the footsteps moved right past our door, down the end of the hall, and back again. Normally things like this have some sort of explanation, some sort of logical reasoning behind it. But what got me is that our dog was growling and staring right at the door. It made it clear that something was amiss and that we weren't imagining things. My husband decided to call out hello, and the footsteps stopped abruptly. He quickly texted his mother, the only other person in the home, asking if she was downstairs. She later replied that she had been asleep as she had taken a nap in the bedroom. As he got up to check, the door to our bedroom suddenly flew open with such force that the knob left a dent in the wall. At this point, our dog went into a frenzy and hid under the table. The room remained pitch dark as my husband scrambled to turn on the lights. Once they were on, everything fell still. We searched the basement, but there was no sign of anyone or anything. On another occasion, we were once again in the basement living room watching TV. Behind us was a small kitchen area with a long bar. Only thing to note in this area were a few bar stools and a phone that sat on its charger. That evening, we were home alone as the rest of the family had gone out for dinner. Suddenly, we heard a strange noise, like something heavy was being dragged across the floor. We muted the TV and listened closely. Moments later, we heard a loud crash right behind the couch, followed by something hitting the back of it. Terrified, we jumped up and saw that two of the bar stools were now lying on the floor behind the couch. The phone that was previously on the charger was now 10 feet away on the floor, ripped out from its place. The distance between the couch and the kitchen was too far for them to have simply fallen. We instantly booked it upstairs and stayed outside until we could calm down. Over time, we started seeing what looked like a shadowy figure standing in the doorway. It would just stand there, slowly fading away each time. It happened so often, we tried to ignore it until it just disappeared. When we mentioned these experiences to his mom and stepdad, they admitted that they had seen and heard strange things as well. We would hear the toilet flush and the sink turn on by itself upstairs, only for everything to go silent moments later. Walking through the house in the dark gave us an unsettling feeling, like there was always something just in arm's reach. One night, we decided to hold a seance. We wanted to see if we could communicate with whatever was in the house. We sat in the kitchen, near the arched doorway leading to the basement stairs, and began asking questions. Suddenly, we heard heavy footsteps racing up the basement stairs directly at us. My husband, his mother, little sister, and I all jumped up, staring directly at the doorway. The footsteps got louder as they neared the top, but then stopped immediately. We ran outside, terrified, and stayed there until we gathered the courage to go back in. These are just a few of the many unsettling experiences we had while living there. When I asked my husband if he ever experienced anything like that before, he said strange things had happened, but they escalated after I moved in. His mother said the same. Eventually, we went to the local library and spoke to a historian, who told us that a young woman had taken her own life in the house back in the late 70s. She had unfortunately hung herself near the basement kitchen after a long period of depression. Everything started to make sense after that. Some stories, even when explained, leave an imprint far deeper than any history lesson.